Thanks, everyone. So as Kim said, my name is Angus Neal. I'm with a company called The Mill. We have offices in 4 cities across the world. And my clicker is not working, so I'm just going to click it once more. And try again. Click. So I'm just going to stand here, keep on pressing this button until something happens. There we go. So let me just tell you about The Mill first while I'm standing up here. So The Mill is a visual effects content creation studio. We specialize in photoreal CGI, visual effects design, and interactive experiences. We're constantly utilizing emerging technologies in order to tell stories that move people through moving image. For those of you that didn't see the keynote this morning, which I'm sure is probably a lot of you, we partnered with Chevy, Epic, and Commonwealth in order to create a real-time visual effects short film. Is it working now? Let me try that again. No, still not working. So I think, I'll just tell you when to move on to the next slide then. How about that? Okay, so what we did is we worked with Epic to create a short film that does visual effects, creates visual effects in real time, integrated with live action. We believe that this is a world's first, so we're pretty excited about it. But let me just show you the film, and then after that I can talk more about it.
Lewis, you've won so many times in your career. Monaco in '09, for example. How do you do it, man?
Well, you know what? There's always a way to win. There's always a way through.
Lewis is going to be the first human ever to race a car operated by artificial intelligence. Let's meet the competition. Aja.
Hello, gentlemen. In my simulations, I have beaten Lewis 148,623 times.
And how many real races have you won, Aja?
This will be the first.
I see all the possibilities, Lewis. You cannot pass me. You do not win.
There's always a way through.
Lewis, congratulations. This was a historic win.
Well done, Lewis. But our race has just begun.
Thank you. Thank you. OK, so I have 2 clickers now. Let me try one of them. OK, that one doesn't work. Let's try the next clicker. That one also doesn't work. OK, so we're gonna do this the old-fashioned way. JJ, can you give me the next slide, please? So what we've seen right now is not a pre-rendered film. There's no, not even a burnout. All of the cars and visual effects for the whole film are being rendered and composited in real time right here under Michael Gay's workstation, right under his desk. So it's pretty impressive, I think, what we're pulling off there. The project was a culmination of about 5 months' worth of work with incredible technical collaboration between Epic Games and The Mill. We've been using game engines for quite some time at The Mill for all of our VR work, and combining it with live action just seemed the next logical step. So the human race uses 3 core recent technologies that we've been developing. One of them is the Mill Blackbird, which you can see to my left. The other one being Mill Stitch and Mill Cyclops. We like naming things. So the first piece of the puzzle was the Mill Blackbird. Let me go into that with a bit more detail. Next slide, please, JJ. OK, so this is the Mill Blackbird, the world's first truly configurable virtual car. So we built this. You're trying to think, why would a visual effects company build a virtual car? Well, we did a lot of car commercials, and we kept on running into the same problem again and again. We couldn't get the cars on the chute. I know it sounds strange, but auto companies' development cycle is getting shorter and shorter, than ever before. Prototypes are very closely guarded, and confidentiality is such a big deal these days. So we often had to build the vehicles in CG. What I'd like to do is play a short film that will just roughly outline the Blackbird, and then later on in the talk, we can actually show you some live demos. If you play the film. Okay. So that's our Mill Blackbird. Now, in the visual effects world, we're constantly solving problems. And one of the biggest problems in visual effects is visualizing these effects on location or on set when you're shooting things. You can't always find talking chameleons or get Diablo to turn up for a call time. So the visual effects business has always found inventive ways to help filmmakers and actors visualize what will eventually be there, using cardboard cutouts, clay sculptures, tennis balls for eyeline, the craft list goes on. One of the most difficult things is you can't actually tell what the final visual effects is going to look like when you're actually shooting it. It takes days, weeks, even months until the final visual effects is actually done. After we've finished animating, lighting, and rendering, that's only when you can truly visualize what's happened. So while all this is happening on our visual effects projects, our emerging technology team is using game engines for our augmented reality and virtual reality pieces. We started to think about how game engines could help us visualize visual effects in real time on set. So we started experimenting. All of this experimentation led to Cyclops, our custom virtual production toolkit. It utilizes real-time tracking and rendering to integrate photoreal CGI into live-action film. Here's some early tests that we did. This is probably a couple of years old. That's Raymond up there, if you saw him. You can see these tests. We're pulling real-world lighting and reflection in order to integrate our CG objects into the real world. That's one of the initial tests that we did for the Blackbird. A little toy model has actually proved quite useful. We realized that we weren't very good at tracking, so we had to bring in some experts. So you can see from these tests just how powerful a Cyclops can be, kind of using the real-world lighting and real-world reflections in order to integrate real-time CGI into the environment. For the human race film, we knew that we needed a rock-solid monocular tracking solution that would work through a cinema lens. So we investigated a lot of different tracking options out there, so none of them were quite good enough, as I alluded to earlier on. So we got in touch with OpenCV Jedi Knights at Aray to help us with the task. I'd like to invite Ethan from Aray up to the stage. Awesome. I'm not going to give this to you because it's not going to help you.
I'll use my hand. So, okay, thank you, Angus, for the kind introduction. So, my name is Ethan Rubley. I'm co-founder of a young startup named Aray, and really what we're looking at is how do we apply computer vision and machine learning to kind of bridge the gap that's closing between cinematography and games. And so we were approached by the Mill, and I think we can go to the next slide. So we were approached by the Mill, and they were experiencing the limitations of kind of off-the-shelf fiducial marker tracking. So I'm going to kind of frame this as a tutorial on how we accomplish the robust tracking for the Blackbird. And so I'll start with an explanation of a fiducial marker. You may know these as QR codes or tags, or maybe you've used the AR toolkit or a plugin that's already in Unreal. And so these are a fundamental piece for a monocular augmented reality pose estimator. So what is a fiducial marker? It's really just a set of high-quality 2D corners that you can estimate with sub-pixel accuracy and unique IDs per corner. And so this information allows you to go from 2D measurements from the main cinematography lens and estimate robustly the pose of a known object. And so these are many use cases in pose estimation, camera calibration, and the great thing about fiducial markers is they're simple. You can paste them onto whatever rigid object you want, and there are existing open source implementations with nice licenses like April Tag, which is what we ended up using here. We found it to be the best. So next slide, please. So, okay, another key component for doing your video see-through augmented reality is really knowing the camera parameters. How do you project points in the scene into the main plate of the camera? And so to do this, you need to know several things, and you're probably all familiar with the jargon from the game world. To us computer vision nerds, it's, we want to know the focal length of the camera, right? And the center of projection, and then the distortion model of the lens. Because typically with a cinema lens, there's barrel distortion, so straight lines aren't straight. And so why is this important? To accurately estimate the pose of the object, you need to know these projection functions, this model, and also to accurately render. Unreal actually had to do they distort the render so that it matches with the real cinematography. Next slide, please. So another key component of this was accurate object calibration. So off-the-shelf libraries typically focus on a single planar target. And here we had a rigid object that we wanted to view from any angle that was self-occluding. And so we wanted to be able to paste any number of these tags onto this object and get a accurate 3D point cloud of all of those high-quality 2D corners that we can detect. And so we did this through a process similar to photogrammetry, where you take a lot of views with a high-resolution camera of the object, and then you just take all of those images and you throw it into a nonlinear optimization called bundle adjustment, and you solve for the 3D position of all those corners. And this gives us a sub-millimeter accurate model of the tags. Now keep in mind, this solution is not specific to the Blackbird. It's just specific to kind of rigid objects. Next slide, please. So, okay, and then the final step is real-time pose estimation. So normally, if you're just detecting a single tag, it's kind of easy. You estimate this homography, this planar homography between the tag and the camera, and it gives you the pose. But for this combination of tags, we wanted to basically use all of the information available to us. And so what we do is we find a few tags. So here the lighting's great. We can find every tag out in the mountains at 6 o'clock in the morning. We only detect like 2 or 3 tags per frame. And so what we do is we take those initial detections that are given from the April Tag library, gives us an initial pose estimate, and we reproject kind of the images, the textures of those fiducial markers onto the main plate, and then do an image-based search template alignment. And this gives us a highly accurate pose, probably the best we could do with a monocular solution. I think we've kind of reached the limits of what can be done with a beautiful, simple cinematography camera. And yeah, so that's the Array piece of this. So yeah, if you're interested in computer vision, machine learning, and its applications in creative freedom, look us up. Thank you.
Okay, so now that we have the Blackbird tracked, that's just the first step. There were many pieces of the puzzle that still had to be brought together in order to render the skin over the vehicle. Next frame, please. So I'm going to introduce Eric, developer at the Mill, who's going to explain to you all the additional components that brought Mill Cyclops to life. Come aboard, Eric.
All right. Thanks, Angus. Next slide, please. So in this section, we'll break down Cyclops into its remaining components, starting from the video feeds all the way to the final Unreal Engine composite. So our system ingests primarily 2 video feeds, one from the hero camera and one from the rig on the Blackbird for environment capture. Whereas previously we would stitch these 4 cameras in post-production, we now wanted to do it in real time on the car itself. Fortunately, we worked a lot on 360 VR shoots before, and we had the need to develop software for previs, and we were able to reuse that software here. Next slide, please. This project presented a lot of new challenges. For instance, cables and moving cars really don't work well together, so we had to develop a custom wireless solution. We had to take into account distance, resolution of the feed that we're transmitting, interference problems, and latency, which we wanted to minimize. Initially, we tried to use some sort of wireless video over IP solution, but it proved to be slightly unreliable in the environment. So we went back with a dedicated video transmission solution. So how did we bring these video feeds inside Unreal? For the shoot, we used a NDI media framework plugin that Epic wrote, and that worked quite well. After the shoot, we decided to take the camera feeds directly into our capture card and write our own custom SDI plugin. SDI stands for Serial Digital Interface. It's a standard for broadcast-grade video transmission, and it's widely used in the industry. For instance, this room is wired all over the place with these SDI coaxial cables. Just to note that we actually had to modify this plugin not only for video input, but also to integrate tracking, because we wanted to sync the video frame with the pose estimate from Aray. To ensure that our virtual car is properly aligned with the Blackbird, we had to do a few conversions. We're converting coordinate systems from OpenCV to Unreal so that we get a valid camera track. So just one note that the coordinate systems have different handedness, and this is a common problem with augmented reality applications. It can be tricky to handle, but with correct change of basis math, it works. So now that we have a valid camera track, oh great, we have a clicker. Okay. So now that we have a valid camera track, let's see how we built our Unreal scene. It's very simple. There's essentially 3 or 4 objects in there. 2 of them are static. The first one is the virtual car, which lies at the center of the scene. Then it's surrounded by a huge sphere, which takes the video feed of the environment, the 360 capture. This is used by a skylight at every frame to provide us with image-based lighting. And so we thank Epic Games for the performance improvements there. This way, we were able to obtain quite realistic reflections of the environment. The only moving object is the Cine camera, which has a video backplate tied to it. And as we receive the tracking information, it sort of aligns itself correctly, and the perspective matches between the object and the video. I believe this, next slide, please. OK. So great. Now that all these scene components are working together, we noticed that the lighting isn't completely accurate. It looks a bit flat. Well, this is expected because we're taking video feeds that are low dynamic range, 8-bit. So we had to compensate for that with a few shader tricks. First, we handle the color space conversion, going from red log to linear. And after that, we upscaled the brightest points in the image, like the sun, to simulate its actual brightness value. So with the addition of a few more controls, like exposure, we were able to obtain pretty good results. And so this is when it all came together on the test day, and later you'll see on the actual shoot. I think everyone was pretty happy with the results. We were testing in the warehouse in LA, and then everything was ready to go. And so we drove above the camera car and the Blackbird outdoors, and then we could see the trees reflecting in the virtual car as it drove around, and I think that was extremely rewarding for everyone. So I'll hand it back to you, Angus, for a special demo, I believe.
Thank you, Aray. One, two. Thank you, Eric. So what we're going to give you now is a demonstration of the Blackbird live. We are fortunate enough to have a Steadicam here and a turntable that can turn the car beautifully around. So now what? OK. So as the car rotates, you'll be able to see reflections of the environment per frame that's sunk to the background plate. Those of you in the audience can probably see yourselves as well reflected in the car if you look really carefully. So the reason why it looks so good is because of the lighting and the reflections. Latency was incredibly important. We want as close as a one-to-one experience for the DPs and directors in order for them to frame the shot correctly. But what truly is remarkable is imagine this vehicle traveling at 50 miles an hour down a mountain road, going through variable lighting conditions, and actually having the real-time composite of that vehicle inside the tracking vehicle as you're filming it. I think it's pretty impressive. All this is happening in real time, obviously. Pretty cool stuff. What I'd like to do is next hand over to Francois, who headed up the look dev for the project.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, hello everybody. All right, so let's go back to the title page, please. So my name is Francois Antoine. I lead the configurator and the look dev on this project. I am the Viz Tech manager for Unreal Engine Enterprise. So all right, let's go to the next slide. So the challenge with this project was that we had to have several cars, 2 racing at the same time in real time, with dynamic lights and shadowing, so no light baking. And the big challenge, of course, is that everybody knows what cars look like, right? They're real objects. They're not UFOs or alien monsters. So we see them every day, and it's pretty easy for someone to spot when something's not right with a car. Next slide. So the approach we took, of course, is using as much reference photography as possible. And the first thing people will do is, open up Google and go look for images. And so, here we're looking for some yellow shots of the Camaro. And this is the thing. The first thing you'll do, take up the first picture. This is from the official GM website. And the yellow looks like a yellow gold metallic. So you might be tempted to say, OK, that's my color. But then you look at a second picture, and you're like, wow, this is actually not metallic. It's pastel yellow. So what am I doing? And then you look at another picture, and now it's a deep yellow with lots of reflections. And then you look at yet another one, and now it's got some green in it as well. So the point I'm trying to make is don't use that stuff if you can, all right? So if you have the opportunity, let's try to shoot your own reference. And I'm going to explain why that is in a second. So when you do reference photography, what you're trying to do is get reference of the material itself. That's what you want in an image. You don't want all the other things. And this is what you actually capture when you take a picture. You capture the surface description. You capture what your camera sees. It interprets, using its sensor and its electronics, what lighting looks like. It's got optical artifacts from the lens. And of course, you capture the lighting as well. What you do want is get rid of all those variables. And you can do that with calibration, of course. Color checkers, optical profiling, et cetera. And that allows you to basically isolate what the material is actually doing and what it looks like. So the way we do this is setting up like a 8-angle shoot of the car, fully calibrated, 360. We capture the lighting using a lat long, so a panoramic IBL. We do everything bracketed so we can get high dynamic range images. We shoot color charts in gray cards. And we also shoot gray ball and chrome ball. And I'll go and show you what the output is. So this is the output of one of those reference shoots, about 100 pictures. And this is what some of the samples look like. All right. So you see we mark down the lines for the camera positions. They're always aligned to one of the axes on the ground. We do a clean plate, and we do a car plate. The clean plate is that so we can put the CG car on it after, and we can do a before and after between the real car and the CG car. And this is what the stitched lat long looks like. So this is what we're going to use for ambient lighting in the environment. What we're trying to do is recreate the lighting. So just quickly dive into this for people who are not familiar with what these things are. So this is our calibration panel. Basically, it's used to figure out what the lighting is, to some extent, lighting cast from the sun, but also to figure out how our camera is interpreting the image on the day of the shoot. And so we also have a chrome sphere that we use. And the chrome sphere is for capturing the orientation of that IBL. So when you put it in Unreal Engine, you got to figure out how your world, how your lighting is aligned. It has to be aligned the same way as it was on the shoot day. By decreasing the exposure on the bracketed image, you can identify where the sun is pretty accurately, so you can position your directional light right there. And also, just a little gotcha for everybody, when you do put your chrome sphere and you're trying to match a real sphere in the real world, chrome spheres are not mirrors. They actually reflect usually about half of the light intensity, so make sure that your material, if you do try to do that, is not like just cranked up all the way to fully reflective. And then we also have a gray ball. So this is a ball that's as diffuse as possible. In this case, we use a material called Spectralon. And this material is 99% diffuse. So you don't want to get any kind of specular highlight because you're trying to gauge the intensity of the light on a diffuse surface. And this also allows you to evaluate the ambient lighting at the bottom of the sphere there. Thank you. So our process, once we get those images, we have to process them. And we have a fully 32-bit linear TIFF process. 32-bit images, we convert them from the raw files. We merge them to EXRs. And they're still in linear space. And at that point, we do any kind of exposure compensation or color chart balancing that is needed to make them as neutral as possible. So that was for the plate images, which are the backgrounds. Now we captured the IBL. And often, because of sensor polarization, we'll get different values in the sun, even though we shot at the same time, because it's going through a slightly different process. And the camera positions are also different. They're rotating. So we have some built-in functionality in our engine for this project that allows you to control the exposure of the sky. And what you're seeing here basically is the reference plate surrounded by the IBL. And you want them to match, obviously, because you want the lighting on your car, the sky intensity to match. So this is the kind of final scene in our engine. What you have here are the square cutouts. Those are the pictures that you took in EXR, put onto emissive cards in our engine. And then you have the 3D objects that are a chrome sphere, a gray ball, and a color chart. And what you want them to do is match. That means that your lighting, your exposure, and your tone mapping is correct. And therefore, you have indeed recreated the lighting environment that you did your F-shoot virtually. So this is the kind of calibration step you need to do. Once you reach this point, now you're ready to do look dev. You're ready to load up your images that you took of the car, and you know that when you adjust your materials, you're actually adjusting the real color of the materials. You're not adjusting the materials plus all kind of optical artifacts plus the lighting. So yeah. All right, next slide, please. So this is what the Unreal scene would look like. Pretty simple. You have your skylight, your directional light. You have those objects in there, so you can always look at them. And you have the 8 camera positions. This is an early version of the car in the look dev environment. So you're in a good spot to get started. So we did a quick first pass. And then we have to kind of push the engine to its limits in order to achieve that, kind of pre-rendered look. So we turn on high precision normals, which is a feature we added last year. So what it does, it allows to describe the surface better, so you get more accurate reflections on the car. And you can see the artifacts up at the upper right corner where you normally get some kind of a breakup in the edge. So it has a big impact on reflections. So reflection quality as well. I'll go back a slide, please. There we go. So the cube map resolution. So cube, that's basically the environment, the lat long. Usually to be more optimized in games, that is actually downsampled quite a bit. But the side effect, that's good. We're good there. But the sound effect is that when it's not very sharp, it makes your car paint look dull or rough, as you can see here. And with the increase in resolution, you get a much better feeling of the glossiness of a clear coat. So that's an important feature right there. Next slide, please. Then we have the dual normal material. So this is a material that allows you to have a normal for the bottom layer. So this is super useful for metallic paints and for carbon fiber. So it reacts more realistically to lighting. And I'm going to show you a pretty cool slide right after this. All right. So if you look at this, this is a metallic paint applied to the wheel. And here we're in a detailed lighting mode. So we're not seeing any color, but we're seeing the lighting interaction with the normals. And you can actually see the metallic flakes picking up lighting right there. And they're in the bottom layer, you can see on some of the spokes. So it's pretty detailed, cool stuff. All right, next slide, please. We also implemented reflection occlusion for skylights. So this is a technique pioneered by LM for Pearl Harbor. They've used it ever since. And this basically allows you to occlude reflections that come from the skylight. So it adds a ton of realism, and it's something that we didn't have a way to do before. All right, next slide, please. Another pretty cool thing here. So we have an ambient occlusion decal. So this is something we realized that was missing, is that normally to darken underneath the car, you'll have the shadow, but the shadow is still being lit by the ambient lighting. So you don't get that feeling that the car is really sitting and occluding lighting on the ground. So you might be tempted to use a normal decal on the ground, but the problem is that decal, if you shine directional light on it, it's still going to be there, when in reality, that area should be lit and therefore should not have ambient occlusion anymore. So this ambient occlusion feature allows you to only occlude in direct lighting. That means if you point the light at it, you can see you're still getting darkening, but it's respecting where the light, this directional light is lighting. So much better contact shadows on the ground. We have a new algorithm for depth map shadows. Same resolution, just substantially sharper shadows, and it features auto-biasing as well, so you don't have to play with shadow biasing anymore. So basically a free improved algorithm for depth maps. All right, this is a big one for us. This is FFT bloom. Basically what it is doing is that it's taking a kernel image, so a little image of a bloom that you have, you take through a pinhole with a camera, and through your lens, you'll get a little starburst shape that you guys are used to seeing in cameras. What it does is that it looks at all the pixels on the scene, and it applies that to all the pixels. And obviously, the brighter ones kind of apply it more. The trick is that every single pixel in the scene with the bloom affects every other pixel as well. So typically, it's super expensive, and as far as I know, nobody else has this in real time. So we found a way to do this, and you can see the star-shaped crosses there on the highlights. So it adds that feeling of optical believability, like it's being filmed through a camera lens. Next slide, please. All right, so this was kind of a challenge, and so we had to come up with a way to do high-speed motion blur on wheels. Motion blur in our engine is linear, so if you're rotating something very fast, it keeps wanting to do your motion blur streak in a straight line, which is what you're seeing in that artifact. So we did a tech art kind of workaround, having several wheels and kind of blurring between them. So it gives that feeling of the wheel turning at a very fast speed, you know, the kind where it's almost just the spokes are blurred, but it's almost staying in place. You can still control the speed of the tire. This is kind of a slow speed, but it still reacts to lighting properly and does all those things. So it worked pretty well for us. So all these techniques, they give you about 80 to 90% of the way there. But you know, so the car looks pretty, it's behaving pretty realistically to lighting, but what makes it look real, what makes it look physical? And that's kind of the key step in look dev that you gotta think about when you want your asset to look real. So I'm gonna go into some of the examples of the things we did. Next slide, please. So one of the big ones, so I'm big on making tires look realistic. You'll see there's quite a few of those, because I think that's usually the part that people omit. They put kind of like a tube-shaped thing on the rim, and they just call it a day, and you lose all the detail that you're gonna see here. So contact patch, so obviously the car drove in, so it's got dust on the tread. So adding that adds definitely some detail. Little details, reflectors, things that have light bulbs, they're functional. And you think, hey, they're up close, you won't see them, but look at how far we are from the car, and we can see that detail. You can see, of course, the metallic paint as well. So, it's been built, it has an edge and a frame. All that stuff adds realism to your car. Look at the sidewall there. So usually people skimp on the sidewall. Look at how that sidewall is breaking up the specular right there. The text on there is breaking up, and you can see that from quite far away, more than you believe. So even if it's not the most precise thing, it's worth putting a sidewall on there. So once again, it makes it look more physical, more realistic. Next slide, please. The orange peel on the paint. So we have that on our shaders. It was out with the automotive pack. Once again, you see that stuff, but even if you move back, you'll see it around the reflection the specular hit. So adds a lot of realism, just like the real cars have a dimpled look on them because the way they're sprinted. So headlights. Headlights, you have a tendency to put something just glowy and call it a day. So we worked on giving some volume and depth to those lights to give the feeling that there's some light bulbs back there. There's some parallax happening in the light headlight elements. We use volume textures for that as well. And then a nice little detail here. So we have some rainbowing effect and the tempered glass. You can see there's like a little gradient rainbow effect that you'll see sometimes on a day when you're in full sunlight. So once again, little details. as to the feeling. So yeah, I recommend the steps. Obviously, they're part of look dev, that you got to figure out what looks real and what doesn't and why. Often go back to your reference images. So I'm going to give you a little turntable look of the 3 cars we look dev, the final results. So this is our red Zeal 1. We look dev'd it in 9 colors, so I just have one up here. This is our competing car, the FNR. So this one was look dev from the best images we could get. We didn't have actual physical car to shoot. Then we got the old Camaro. It's everybody's favorite. All right, well, that's it for my talk. I just wanted to thank the teams, the look dev team and the configure team. They did an awesome job on this project. So thank you very much. I'm going to hand it over to Michael and to Joji to do shot breakdowns.
Thank you, Francois. This was actually the perfect opportunity to work with Epic and share tips and techniques between VFX and game engine workflows. We analyzed our compositing process and gave Epic a list of key feature requests that would help us work the way we normally do. What we ended up with is an extremely robust compositing toolset.
Right, and some of those features are features that we're going to slowly integrate into the engine over next year. So let's sit down and we'll take a look at how we use these features in the engine. So I'm going to sit down in the engine here, we punch that up. All right, so all this we're going to look at today is in sequencer, and some of the rendering features are obviously in the engine. So the first thing we started with this project is we needed to have a way to bring in images into the engine and frame synchronous images. This is something that's been requested by a lot of people. So this project with Mill was a perfect opportunity for us to actually put that into production. So if we just play the setup here. So we're playing this plate, which is obviously from the hero shot, looking at the Blackbird. Cool part about what we did was we were loading all EXR images, 16-bit, full res. The 360 capture, which we'll see in a second, is 3072 by 1536. All the plates coming in are full 1920 by 1080. And it sounds kind of simple to bring the images in, but when you're dealing with multiple layers, huge file sizes, we also had to create a caching system and a proxy system so that if you don't have a beast of a machine like we're using here, other people could work. So we have a proxy system that allows, as well as a high-res system, that allows us to stream at about, I think with this demo that you saw earlier, we're streaming at 1.8 gig a second. So it's pretty cool when you think about it.
So what we're looking at here is the original plate that's straight out of the camera. If you look at the next, this is the plate after it's gone through an external cleanup process. That includes removing ground shadows, integrating road reconstruction, and removing unwanted signs and shrubbery. This is the 360 environment capture that comes directly from the Blackbird, and it's loaded in as an equirectangular projection. This image also goes through a cleanup process.
So this is the same image Eric was talking about earlier that's actually mapped onto a sphere, and then we use that sphere to reflect onto the car, which we'll see in just a second. So in this setup, this is kind of the scenes setup. So in post, all the cars were, and cameras were tracked in a more traditional way, like through a few different pieces of software. So we were easily able to bring those cameras and objects into the engine and start to the scene setup, and that allowed us to, again, very quickly get into the engine and start looking at stuff in the cut.
So now that the initial setup is done, we move on to lighting. The previous environment capture is applied as a texture onto a sphere, and we use a skylight to recapture it every frame. This gives us positionally accurate reflections and ambient lighting. So next, we move on to setting up the sunlight direction. Being able to view a chrome ball that updates in real time made the process of aligning the sun to our IBL intuitive and interactive.
So now you can see we've aligned the sun to the chrome ball, and we have very accurate shadows that match what was shot on the day.
So generally in VFX, we stop around here, and we begin rendering CG passes. We start the compositing work on pre-rendered imagery. Thanks to Epic's amazing dev team, we were able to continue this process in engine and composite in real time.
Yep. So again, a lot of time was spent kind of tweaking some of the more subtle things later on. So in this case, we're adjusting shutter angle. So at the beginning of the shot, it's very, very blurry, and by the end of it, we pretty much removed all motion blur. Another thing we can mess with is focus. So you can see at the beginning of the shot here, we are slightly out of focus, and then at the end, we kind of bring the Z01 back into focus. So because all this is happening real time, it allows you to try things creatively in the cut, try things with a different take of a shot and sequencer, and really allows you to explore more options more quickly. Like with focus, one of the other things you have to kind of match to the imagery that was shot is chromatic aberration. So we've kind of exaggerated it here just to show that it's all happening in real time. But you can see it's been applied.
So color correction is an extremely important step in compositing. We can color correct the entire image, but in this case, you can see that we're just color correcting either the car or the shadows. So specific color correction control like this is especially useful when stylization or additional art direction is necessary to make it go beyond a physically accurate rendering. So this is light wrap. Light wrap is actually a very subtle process that we apply to almost all of our CG renders. It takes a soft image of the backplate and it blends it in along the borders of the render to help take off the CG edge.
So one thing that's very important when you're matching CG to a live action plate is lens distortion. For this project, it was absolutely crucial that we had a lens distortion pipeline to make it look like these live CG cars are being rendered over the background. There are a few ways to do that. For this project, we adopted an image-based distortion that allows you to get a much more accurate distortion on the CG than just kind of a equation-based distortion. So we're able to take distortion from 3 separate match-moving softwares and bring that into the engine through adopting an image-based distortion.
So like Michael's saying, because it was image-based, this in particular was very interesting because instead of using an ST map for absolute pixel transforms, as we usually do in VFX, we used a UV displacement map that's widely used in games. This allowed for lower resolution and lower bit depth with a negligible loss in accuracy.
So kind of the final step is adding a post move. So because this was a road race, you wanted to add like a little bit of camera shake or a little bit of rumble, dirty up the camera a little bit. So to do that, we're actually moving the plate and the CG in some cases. So what we did, because the mill, like many places, uses other 2D software to do this, we actually wrote an importer from Nuke to take post-move data, bring it into the engine, and render the engine and the plate in real time.
Now we'll move on to some images that explain the masking and layering. So as you can see here, holdout masks are extremely necessary when objects need to occlude the CG renders in the foreground. In this case, we have the cars entering the tunnel. On the left, you can see what it renders, how it renders before the mask. The middle is an alpha that is separating the foreground from the background, and on the right is the final picture.
Yep. And so along with the EXR implementation we did, you can obviously bring in RGBA, so use these alphas for holdouts and other things.
So using the alpha, we were also given the ability to shadow mask, and these were implemented to get better control of CG shadow integration and fall off. On the left here, you see CG shadows going beyond the road, and then this matte was made to actually give it a softer edge. On certain shots, we had an additive foreground layer, and that's extremely helpful because we can add photographic lens flares, dirt elements, and it adds to the realism of the shots. So on the left here, we see the original render. the foreground element in the middle, and it composited together on the right side.
Yeah, and again, these are all brought in as part of the EXR pipeline and layered on top of the CG using a new compositing.
So for the final step, I would like to pass it back to Angus.
Thank you, Michael and Joji. That's fantastic. OK, so for one of the final steps, one of the final bits of magic of visual effects is actually all of the particle effects. So we were lucky enough to have access to Epic's prototype particle editor, Niagara, which I'd like to actually just, because we're short of time, just bring up Jimmy Gass, effects artist at the Mill, to talk quickly about this and how we utilized it.
All right, thank you.
Jimmy.
Thank you. But before we were offered to use Niagara, I didn't even know it was going to be on the project. I just started messing around inside of the material shader, basically, or material editor, and working more comfortably in the node base, similar to how I would in Houdini. So I would just make a basic shader, and then just, you can see on the bottom there, like a much larger bit of logic to move particles around, not actually inside of Cascade, but with Cascade. But then the prototype was offered up, so I did actually get to play around a little bit with Niagara, but I started a little bit simpler with something that you could very easily do in Cascade. But the advantage, though, in this instance was the ability to, for the artist, I could expose just very simple parameters as far as like how the radius of which to spawn from, speed, colors, and all these different things. So they didn't have to go into the Cascade editor and try to tweak the more rigid parameters there. They just had very specific data to manipulate. I could also make a little bit more complex effects with some of the more modularization of like the mathematics of reflect vectors and plane collision. So this is one little thing that we added to the tires. So even bringing in the data from the car was possible, so that I could kick up rocks and throw them in a direction based on actually how the car was moving and the tires were moving. And on the same lines, we use the sprite-based smoke, basically, with the animated sprite sheets. But just one extra element that we were able to do is also bring in the data of the following car, so that it would actually push out of the way. So there's like a little bit of dynamic avoidance there, which helped just instead of just clipping straight through it. But then the more complicated things, whenever the disintegration of the car happened. There was, being a prototype, Epic was actually, I was kind of asking for things as I needed them, and they delivered on a lot of things, like the ability to emit from the surface, but with a parameter, I could wipe the car in a way, so I could put data on a vertex and read that actually in Niagara to, do things a little bit more specifically, and then there's a secondary effect of like I call them the circuit lines, which is two different particle systems. One particle system is actually the leading edge that I drove around, again, with a little bit more complex information as far as turning 90 degrees, when to turn, and when it did turn, I could spawn an event that the other cloud would pick up. And that would lay down a segment that the parent particle would tell it basically how far it traveled before it turned that corner, the color that was on that, and a plethora of other data, which was like a dozen different pieces of information that would be passed along to create that. And these are just a couple more like iterations on that. So ultimately, I was given a lot of control on how to build all these little pieces basically and put them together as like building blocks. I think ultimately, I guess some people might feel like it might be a little bit daunting, especially compared to something like Cascade, where you can drop in just modules and dial certain parameters and get an effect pretty quickly. A lot of this was built from scratch, but ultimately, you should be able to. There'll be also like modules, I guess, after the prototype stage of all of this. That you could just drop down very basic effects, like the rock thing was at the end for me was just a single node that you would just put on the effect, and again the artist only had to tweak like 2 or 3 parameters to get it into the scene. So it's as generic as you need it to be, as well as very granular and specific, and you can get all the way down into the bare mathematics of adding and subtracting vectors if you need to. So That's pretty much it on that. Happy birthday to my son. He's 6 today. Thank you very much.
Happy birthday. Happy birthday. OK, so we are running short of time, as I said. So thanks, Jimmy. At the Mill, we believe in moving people through moving image. A big part of our business is photoreal CGI blended with live action. And we believe that the story is the most important thing, and visual effects should never get in the way of narrative. We're constantly innovating, looking for ways to engage the audience. We're at a point now where we can create real-time CGI that looks really, really good, and it's only going to get better. Using Unreal Engine, we're able to create photoreal interactive experiences like never before. At the Mill, we believe that not just the future of visual effects is real-time. We believe that people will want to customize their content and engage with their media so that it is relevant to them. We see this as a huge opportunity for studios, brands, and storytellers alike moving forward. If this type of project excites you, we're hiring. Thank you very much.